This is going to be a strange analysis for me because I'm going to do a lot of pretending. I'm going to pretend I didn't play the Switch version of GRIME because if that were the only version I had to go off of, this would not be a flattering or accurate analysis. I've played GRIME on Steam and it's an outstanding game, but Switch owners wouldn't know that. Therefore, I'm going to pretend I only played the game on Steam for the most part of this analysis in order to give an accurate representation of GRIME as a Metroidvania. Then I'll talk about my Switch experience in my closing thoughts. I think that's the most fair way to approach this. Sound good? Let's do this. So, what is GRIME? That, my dear viewers and listeners, is a hard question to answer, but I'll do my best. GRIME's a Soulsvania where you play as the personification of a black hole named Aklan. I think that's his name, or maybe that's his title, or is Endgiver his title? Whatever. His name isn't even the most confusing part of the game, so this has already gotten off to a great start. Anywho, Aklan comes into being after a couple of rock chicks get it on in outer space. Well, he doesn't come into being immediately. Their breath creates all sorts of life and Aklan arrives much, much later. Okay, I'm getting into spoiler territory. I'm gonna pump the brakes and just say, Aklan suddenly comes into existence in this weird area full of arms and misshapen rock dudes. And he's compelled to go to this place and will destroy anything that gets between him and that bundle of nerves or whatever it is. That's really all you get when it comes to setup for GRIME. And even what I told you is more than what the game gives you. So yeah, we're looking at a bona fide Soulsvania here with a decrepit quote-unquote kingdom under a quote-unquote curse full of cryptic lore you'll need to piece together yourself, found throughout its disturbing environments, NPCs' incoherent ramblings, and item descriptions. Hope you like homework, boys. I know the story sounds kinda lame and trite when deconstructed like that, but I'm a sucker for Souls-like tropes in the same way your girlfriend or wife and mother-in-law can't get enough of those Hallmark Christmas movies. And I promise, GRIME's story is worth the time to discover it. But we'll get into all that when we hit the spoilers section. For now, it's time to talk about the game's
combat.
Since I've already called GRIME a Soulsvania, you know what you're in for. Stamina, dodges with iframes, enemies that hit way too hard, corpse running, character builds, all kinds of weapons. Combat's exactly what you'd expect in a Souls-like Metroidvania, and GRIME nails it. There's much satisfaction to be had in besting your enemies with light and heavy attacks, but the crux of GRIME's combat is its parry. Just like in other Souls-likes, press the parry button precisely when the enemy's attack would connect, and you deflect it, unless it's a red attack. Those are too strong for you, traveler. But where GRIME differentiates itself is how its parry can also be an attack. If an enemy with a solid red health bar gets parried, that's the end of the road for them, baby. If there's a white line on their red health bar, that means you gotta knock their life below that line before you can shatter them. And if their health bar is gray, then parrying ain't gonna hurt them. It's a great mechanic that works exceptionally well because you're able to parry mid-action. And any game that encourages recklessly aggressive playstyles is a good game in my book. But the parry mechanic doesn't stop there. Parrying enemies once they're weak will allow Aklan to absorb them, which serves two functions: gaining breath and gaining traits. Let's put a pin in traits so we can discuss that during the progression section. For now, let's focus on our breathing. Whenever you absorb an enemy via a parry, you add breath to your breath meter. Breath is how you heal in this game, and I hate it. You only get one heal for the longest time, so you're forced to parry and absorb enemies to refill the meter, which can take several absorbs in order to refill it completely for an extra heal. It's not a terrible system, but I just don't like parrying. So linking healing to parrying sucks. I get the risk-reward system they're going for, I'm just not a fan. If I need to heal, the last thing I want to do is put myself in greater danger by needing to parry enemies to earn my heal. If you love the system, awesome. But I guarantee there are people out there like me who look at this system and groan. So I wanted to make it known in case anyone would find it to be a deal breaker. It's obviously not a deal breaker for me as I've beaten the game twice, 1.5 if truth be told. But I'll get into that much later when I start pretending the Switch version exists. And there is an alternative way to heal after some DLC was added. But people should probably know this game is pretty dang hard. Much like most Soulsvanias, GRIME is difficult, and this difficulty comes from its complete lack of grace. Most bosses, as you might predict, will take you out in like a hit or 2 or 3. I always find fights that demand near perfection to be frustrating, but evidently never frustrating enough to stop me from playing these damn games. But it's not so much the flawlessness these fights demand that beat down your will to live. It's those f***ing boss runs that have zero respect for your time. If you don't know what a boss run is, it's that period where you're forced to run from the checkpoint back to the boss arena. In most games, it's customary to have a save or checkpoint outside of a boss room, but for some reason, Souls-likes hate you and force you to waste time running back to the boss, sometimes even placing a gauntlet of enemies in your way. No boss run in Grime is as bad as the notorious runbacks to the Capra Demon or the Bed of Chaos, and Grime offers convenient shortcuts if you can find them, but its boss runs are obnoxious nonetheless. For example, the Shapely Fetus. I hope you like waiting on this f***ing elevator every time you die, which will be a lot, because the Shapely Fetus is a son of a bitch. Hey, let's talk about Grime's bosses. You're not gonna believe this, but despite all the shit I just talked about the lack of grace and the annoying boss runs, the bosses in Grime are some of the best Soulsvanias have to offer. I don't think there's a dud in the bunch. From the tutorial boss Amalgam who forces you to get good with parries, to the satisfying double parry and pull combo of the Shapely Fetus. Please don't isolate that sentence. There's a lot of fun to be had in these boss encounters if you don't mind getting your ass handed to you for like an hour. Like other Souls-likes, Grime's boss fights are all about memorization, capitalization, and reaction time. You gotta learn the boss's moves and tells, find opportune moments to get hits in, figure out when parrying is an option, and then execute everything damn near flawlessly. I love challenges like that, but I know everyone doesn't. So trust me when I say, to all of you out there who think boss fights that demand perfection and hours of your time are too stressful to be fun, just know you're the sane ones, and people like me who love it are the ones with the issues. We've made our peace with that. In summary, combat in Grime is exactly what you'd expect for a Souls-like, with stamina playing a big role along with parrying. Parrying is necessary to be successful in Grime, and requires dedication and skill to get proficient with it. But once understood, parrying is highly satisfying. The boss encounters are some of the best the Soulsvania genre has to offer, if you're okay with this style of game. If you don't like spending an hour or so on each boss, then you might not like these bosses as much as I do.
Abilities.
Grime's a little odd when it comes to Soulsvanias. Most of the purest Soulsvanias, The Last Faith, Vigil the Longest Night, Sultan Sanctuary, Death's Gambit Afterlife, tend to focus on combat over anything else when it comes to gameplay, leaving platforming relatively rudimentary. Obviously, all Soulsvanias are platformers where you need to jump around and stuff, but the challenge in most Soulsvania platforming largely comes from their awkward controls instead of deliberate level design. Grime tries to bridge the gap between Souls-like and platformer, and actually does a fairly decent job thanks to its interesting pull abilities. All the other abilities are standard stuff, dash, air dash, double jump, but the pull abilities add some interesting twists to platforming and combat. While platforming, you'll be moving platforms closer, using a platform's inertia to launch yourself, or pull yourself to special points, not unlike a grappling hook. Some of these platforming sections using pull can get pretty tricky, yet be satisfying. I've more to say about platforming, but I'll save it for the spoilers section. In regards to combat, pull's used mainly to gain an advantage or score opportunities to get in some extra hits. If an enemy can be pulled, their attack will briefly emit a yellow aura. Just flick your right stick toward enemies when they glow yellow, then follow up appropriately. Pulling off a nice pull on your enemy never not felt satisfying. Please don't isolate that line either. Returning to platforming, remember how I said Grime does a decent job? Yeah, it's not perfect. First and foremost, there's a significant delay from the time I press the jump button till the time Aklan actually jumps. It's noticeable and annoying. I can't remember if jumps were like this on Steam, but it most definitely is like this on the Switch as of this recording. The game also utilizes fall damage, which isn't uncommon for Soulsvanias, but there were many times I couldn't tell if there was a platform below me, because the game wouldn't show me, even if I did look down first. Just a little fine tuning on level design would have done wonders. And that's really it for abilities. Not a whole lot unique here besides the pull abilities, but dang if they don't use these abilities to their fullest. There are plenty of sections that are going to have you testing your platforming chops, which is unusual for Soulsvanias, but welcome nonetheless. Platforming may not be perfectly executed, but it's done well enough to avoid being too frustrating.
Progression.
This is where Grime, and honestly all Souls-likes, truly gets addicting. Leveling and character builds. Not only is it fun to work towards a particular build and gradually get stronger, but builds heavily add to replayability. In Grime, you collect mass from fallen enemies to upgrade its surrogates, the game's bonfires. There are 5 stats to increase: HP, stamina, strength, dex, and resonance. And each stat, besides resonance, is pretty self-explanatory. Resonance scales with certain weapons, just like strength and dex, and it also scales with certain traits, which we'll get into here in a moment. There's a blacksmith that'll upgrade your weapons as long as you bring him blood gems and mass. And there's equipment in the game that adds bonuses to stats, but don't have stats of their own, which is kind of weird. However, equipping a complete set of armor, chest, arms, and legs, will net you additional bonuses, which I thought was really awesome. I loved hunting down full sets of armor, especially if the set looked cool. That's right, the gear in this game is cosmetic, baby. Fashion grime. I should probably talk about traits now, as full armor sets usually give trait bonuses. Traits are typically passive abilities you can unlock by absorbing a certain amount of the same enemy. Remember how parrying enemies under certain circumstances allows you to absorb and instantly kill them? Well, here's why you want to do that. To unlock all those sweet traits. But unlocking a trait doesn't give it to you. Nope. You gotta activate traits by spending hunt points on them. What are hunt points? Glad you asked. Hunt points are obtained by killing stronger, often hidden or out of the way enemies while exploring. You can tell if an enemy will give you a hunt point either by the red icon by their health bar or by how effortlessly they whoop your ass. Their penchant to show up randomly during exploration adds a lot to the game's overall tension, which I always appreciate. The more dangerous exploration feels, the better. These amped up enemies aren't strong enough to be bosses, but they can be strong enough to shatter you if you aren't paying attention. And this brings us to corpse running and Ardor. Yes, there's corpse running in Grime, and yes, corpse running is the worst. But hear me out when I say, as a staunch critic and petty hater of corpse running, that corpse running in Grime is actually good? Ugh, that felt wrong saying, but it's true. Grime does corpse running right. Let me break it down. Typically, corpse running means you lose all your EXP or currency upon death, and the only way to retrieve what you've lost is to return to the dangerous place where you last died. And if you die without retrieving your fallen soul or whatever, you lose everything. It's actually the worst and can negatively impact exploration. Well, in Grime, you keep your mass, i.e. EXP, upon death and instead lose something called Ardor. Ardor is essentially a multiplier for the amount of mass you receive after killing an enemy, and you build Ardor by killing enemies. When you die, you lose all your Ardor and reclaim half of it when you retrieve your fallen vessel or whatever it is. This works well for many reasons. 1. Who cares about Ardor? 2. Keeping your mass when you die means you can level up before going back out into the wild, so you never feel like you've skipped a beat in progress. And 3. Reclaiming your fallen vessel also heals you, which is incredibly valuable with how limited healing is in this game. So, even when I died during a boss fight, I was like, I wanted you to kill me. Now I have an extra heal, idiot. And that'll do it for progression. As you can see, Grime fits the Souls-like mold pretty well in terms of leveling, character builds, weapon scaling, and weapon upgrades. It mixes things up with how gear doesn't actually improve stats with defense or poise, but instead provides bonuses to your current stats and traits. And Grime mixes it up even more by improving corpse running. But the icing on the progression cake is the traits. Traits are incredibly diverse and can add so much flexibility to your build. Traits alone are an excellent enough incentive to jump back into Grime with a New Game Plus. And if you don't like how you've allocated your hunt points or stats, you can respec at any time with an item called Motley Pearls. So don't be afraid to experiment a little. Even I went nuts with this playthrough and went Dex. Perhaps that's why this run was so cursed.
Exploration.
Biomes in Grime are ugly, repulsive, hard to wrap your head around, and that's what makes exploring them so good. Random hands jutting from rocks, teeth growing out of the fleshly ground, and then suddenly an opulent palace with an underground cavern filled with seemingly endless stone-hewn pillars? What the heck is going on in this game? That's the question that should be going through your head while playing an excellent Metroidvania. Intrigue motivates players to want to see what's in the next room, drives players to want to play for just a few more minutes, which inevitably turns into a few more hours, makes players want to best the enemies that have been shattering them over and over and over again, just so they can see what's going to happen next. Grime's mystery gets its hooks in you early and sinks them in deeper as you press forward. There's nothing like an MV that captures your imagination and makes you want to explore its world. And it's a huge bonus when exploration's also extremely rewarding. While wandering this hostile and absurd world, you can find armor sets, weapons, materials to upgrade your weapons, prey to slaughter for hunt points, and a bunch of other items to help you along your journey. There's never a dull moment in Grime. Unless you count all those times you have to rewrite elevators because you died to the shapely fetus for the 50th frickin' time. Backtracking's the one thing I hated in this game. Akhlon moves so slow. He eventually gets a dash, which was introduced in post-launch DLC, and even then he's not getting any speeding tickets. And the nerve passes, the game's fast travel, never felt like they were in convenient spots or near points of interest except for in the world pillar, the game's sorta hub. At launch, backtracking was even worse because only a few nerve passes existed, but that got updated with some DLC. And I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but you do eventually get a warp ability that lets you travel between surrogates, but you literally get it at the end of the game. This too was updated in a DLC, and now you can get warp earlier, but it's gated behind a pretty tough boss, so good luck with that. Point is, players' time was never meant to be respected in this game, and quality of life was added in post-production, most likely as a response to player complaints. Take from that what you will. But don't let the boring backtracking take away from the game's overall exploration. There are plenty of shortcuts to unlock to alleviate some of the mundanity, and if backtracking's not your thing, it's not necessary in Grime. You get rewarded handsomely for doing so, but if you choose to just stay on the critical path, you'll be fine. My last critique for exploration is how you fill in the map. Frankly, you don't. No matter where you go, the map only updates when you activate a beacon, and you typically find beacons once you've nearly completed the biome. It's aggravating, but I can see the argument for why this is an effective method. Some people like the sustained mystery provided by a blank map and believe it enhances exploration. I believe that sounds like bullshit, but to each their own. That's not to say I didn't like Grime's map. It showcases a dotted line to represent the path you've taken since your last save, and there are objective markers to help you along, and pins you can place wherever you'd like. Also, it keeps track of the last place where you died. It's a small detail, but not one that every Soulsvania uses.
Atmosphere.
This may surprise you, but Grime is gross, but not nasty gross. It creates a type of body horror that's more disturbing than sickening. The environments are so odd and haunting, you can't help but stare at them and wonder, what the hell is going on? But even with its strange imagery, the game eventually takes on a, albeit morbid, fairy tale vibe. I'll go more in depth about that in the spoilers, but I don't think it's a stretch to say Grime feels like it has a moral, not unlike a parable. It mainly tells its story through the different environments Akhlon journeys through. Again, I'll save it for the spoilers, but what the devs are going for here, they absolutely nail. In the beginning, you feel confused and disgusted among the craggy and malformed environs and their inhabitants. But soon you discover there's a hierarchy, and with that hierarchy comes changes in scenery, with each new biome being more formed and concrete than the last. It's intriguing stuff. I guess what I'm saying is the atmosphere in Grime is top tier. It's disturbing and weird and morphs to accommodate the story being told. This also applies to the enemies and their designs, disturbing and weird and appropriate. The music, on the other hand, is so on point that it's downright comical, if I'm to be honest. Most tracks while exploring are ambient and practically non-existent, but as soon as you come up to a boss, your ears will be assaulted with the most epic orchestrated piece this side of FromSoft. And you're just fighting a golden hand with arms, legs, and a sword. It almost feels like parody, but nope. This is an epic fight that deserves an epic soundtrack. Kudos to the devs for making something that should feel ridiculous instead feel monumental. Now, it's time to talk about the narrative and spoilers. I'm putting them together this time around because discovering Grime's narrative is part of the fun, and I don't want to rob that from anyone. All you need to know is I think Grime's narrative is brilliantly told and incredibly interesting. To skip spoilers, go to this timestamp to fast travel to my final thoughts on Grime and how it performed on the Switch. For everyone else, we're going to spoiler country in 3, 2, 1.
Spoilers.
Okay, lots to go over here, so let's start by discussing what's really going on. The two rock chicks getting it on in the beginning, they're not really getting it on. One, if not both, are dying, and one is with child. So one rock lady transfers her breath in the hopes of saving the other and the kid. This outsourced breath pretty much f***s everything up, much like how a donated organ can reject its new host. You see, this entire game takes place in a giant rock lady's corpse floating around in space. And all the living things inside this corpse have been given life thanks to this foreign breath. And this new life, they're in constant pain. Whether physically or emotionally or both, I'm not entirely certain, but they refer to this pain as the old pain. And what this old pain is the fact that these creatures unconsciously know they shouldn't exist. Or in plainer terms, they shouldn't be alive. Enter Aklan, our black hole-headed end giver, the personification of existence's end. Or, in plainer terms, death itself. There are many readings and theories as to who Aklan really is and where he comes from, but for simplicity's sake, it's best just to view him as something that's here to end things. Because that's what he's here to do. End this unnatural cycle of eternal life and release its victims of the old pain. This is a very common trope in Souls-like games, especially in the Dark Souls series. You got your decaying kingdom of former renown, plagued by some curse that keeps this kingdom going long beyond its expiration date, despite how painful it is to its inhabitants. This kingdom represents the Old Guard, and this curse is something the Old Guardians bring upon themselves in an attempt to stop the next generation from bringing about a new age. This unwillingness to relinquish power to the next generation is a universal theme that's understood by everyone in every culture. For instance, it's why the average age of an American congressman or senator is in the 60s. Do you really think a 60-year-old congressman understands the current generation's plight? According to Souls-like games, no. And these people in power don't care about who they hurt as long as they retain their power. In Grime, your congressman who's willing to throw everyone under the bus in order to retain their power is named Shidra of the World Pillar. This colossal parasite sows division and facilitates the status quo not just for power, but for the ability to continue to exist, despite knowing he nor anyone in this long-dead corpse should exist. Much like the chosen undead from Dark Souls, Aklan is the imperfect avatar for the natural order. Through both heroes' unwillingness to give in to seemingly unfair and insurmountable odds, they can and do end their oppressors' cycles and return balance to nature. It's a powerful message that resonates with many gamers and undoubtedly adds to the Souls-like genre's appeal. And I bring all that up because I think Grime does this Souls-like theme justice in a way that's faithful to the trope while also providing a new angle. There is no new age. This is the end. All things must end. It depicts the end in a way that's both inevitable and assuaging, and it delivers this message in a very atypical way, at least for the medium, as a childlike fairy tale. Okay, stick with me here. When you think of a fairy tale, what do you think of? Probably Little Red Riding Hood, or Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or The Three Little Pigs. I'm going to take some liberties based on the definition of a fairy tale, and include works like Alice in Wonderland and, specifically, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, which includes fantastical elements and morality checks aimed at small children, just like shorter fairy tales. Plus, Gulliver's Travels was initially published in smaller, more digestible parts akin to traditional fairy tales. Anyway, in Gulliver's Travels, the protagonist goes on many misadventures and interacts with many different civilizations. The entire ordeal is a humorous social commentary on British imperialism. But more interestingly, because this is more pertinent to Grime, Gulliver's interactions with each island's civilization makes a comical statement about how societal ethics and traditions are affected by its history and culture. Which is a long way of saying people from different places think and act differently than you. Does this sound familiar? It should, because Grime does exactly this, though without Aklan commenting on anything or generally looking like he's giving a shit. So, what's our Endgiver's journey like? He starts out in the Weeping Cavity where he's worshipped by the Uglies. Then, he makes his way to Lithic where its inhabitants use art to distract themselves from the old pain. Remember, the old pain refers to this unconscious knowledge that these creatures shouldn't exist. So distracting them with art appears to be an attempt to give these creatures purpose. Art was introduced by the mothers, probably to distract them not just from the old pain, but also from their other obsession for beauty. This takes us to the Serpent's Path, a place blocked off by the mothers, most likely to stop or control the flow of the Uglies sacrificing themselves to the Carven, the next civilization on our Gulliver's Travels-esque tour. The Carven comprise a higher class, made up of Uglies who've ascended to the rank of Carven through a combination of servitude and by sacrificing their own kind to be materials. The Carven use the remains of destroyed Uglies to build their opulent palace and to make the chiseled bodies both the Carven and the Uglies covet. Aklan, having been born with a chiseled body, is worshipped by the Uglies but hated by the Carven. You see, the Carven are uglies who've received more aesthetically pleasing exteriors through their suffering and betrayals. And they resent Aklan because he never suffered for his chiseled body like they had to. But where do you think this resentment truly comes from? From the fact that the Carvens are still uglies on the inside, and their old pain still persists. I'll pause and allow you to reflect on the low-hanging fruit Grime's story is setting up for you. It's not very subtle, but it doesn't have to be, because simple allegory is perfect for a fairy tale, right? The uglies desire purpose to distract from their pain and convince themselves that beauty and status will fill the void in their soul. So they're willing to enslave and betray themselves to the beautiful ones in the hopes that they too can become beautiful. But they soon discover, once it's too late, that material things do nothing to stop their pain. Moreover, the Carven desire to please the next civilization over, Cenotaph City, whose denizens ultimately find the Carven repulsive because the Carven don't have flesh like them, reinforcing the theme that materialism will never make you happy because happiness doesn't come from without. It comes from within. Don't you see, my dear viewers and listeners, who the uglies truly are? They're you. You're the uglies. All of society is the uglies. I'm just kidding. You're all beautiful. Like and subscribe and hit that bell icon. When broken down like this, doesn't Grime sound like an after-school special from when we were children? Now, I'm not saying anything negative about the narrative. I actually find it quite brilliant to have this childlike micro-story, a Gulliver's Travels-like journey with a universal moral, inside of a more mature macro story, how absolute power corrupts absolutely. I love how the micro and macro stories weave in and out of each other to form a cohesive theme and an engaging experience. And the needle that threads these stories together is named Jan. The way Jan is used as a vehicle to push this fairy tale along is highly effective. From his beginnings as a puppy-eyed worshiper to his grisly end as a jealous traitor jaded by the revelation that materialism will never assuage the old pain, Jan's journey perfectly encapsulates the world of Grime. And that's about it for the narrative. There's this weird part I like to dub the exposition biome that's kinda dumb. It's the part in the pale sky where you do a bunch of inconsequential platforming in order to find these pustules full of breath and memories. You vaguely learn about the giant rock ladies and the child, but it just feels so off, like it was thrown in at the last minute just to justify the double jump ability. You seriously use the double jump here and in a super short section at the top of the world pillar, and then you fight the boss of the game. I'm actually a huge advocate for devs waiting as long as possible before giving players the double jump, but Grime takes it a little too far in my opinion. Oh, I almost forgot. There's only one ending in this game, which means we got ourselves another one-ender, boy. Actually, that's kinda a lie, but also kinda not, but also kinda is. You get a choice prior to fighting Shidra. Escape his prison and fight, or stay imprisoned and become a part of Shidra's world. If you don't fight back, Shidra thanks you, gives you a new body, and then the credits roll. If you fight back and win, you can ascend the peak of creation and fulfill your destiny of being a black hole. There's a slight variation to the fighting back ending that involves you meeting the dead rock lady's child, which is a part of the Colors of Rot DLC, but it doesn't really add much to the finale. Just some new text, a squandered opportunity for a new ending. I will say I loved how they integrated the DLC seamlessly into the game. I didn't feel like anything was tacked on in regards to DLC. Although the added childbed biome completely trivializes the garden biome. Once I got self-pull, instead of going through the garden, I just returned to childbed, which leads straight to the strand of the child. I never even went through the garden on my latest playthrough, which I didn't mind because it's my least favorite biome. There's just something about all the self-pulling platforming I just didn't dig. Alright, that does it for the spoilers. On to Switch performance and my final thoughts.
Conclusion.
Before heading into my final thoughts, I gotta show you some of the bullshit I had to endure with Grime's awful Switch port. And keep in mind, this isn't everything I had to deal with. This is just the stuff I found to be hilarious or unforgivable. First, just look at it. Grime's supposed to be ugly, but this just looks unfinished. Like there's Vaseline on my screen, or it just didn't render a layer. It's tough on the eyes. Second, the delay in the map screen made me want to puke and then die. I hated checking the map because it was so laggy. I don't know, it's just a pet peeve. Next, there were so many glitches with the bosses, but thankfully they were in my favor. I wasn't able to grab footage, but the mothers just froze and let me beat the shit out of them. I had to take my daughter somewhere, so I put the Switch to sleep. When I came back about an hour later, the game was frozen. So I rebooted it And instead of being at the surrogate where I was when I paused the game, it reloaded me in the middle of the mothers fight, with the mothers frozen in place. So I smacked them around and took the easy victory. The next boss glitch I actually got footage of was against the Giant of Eyes. For some reason, an invisible barrier kept me from rematching him. I eventually broke through the barrier and discovered the Giant of Eyes was still fighting as if I had never left. Here's footage of me running back where he's still shooting waves. What I discovered was the Giant of Eyes wasn't resetting, and neither was his health. I eventually won through attrition. It was weird. But one of the glitches that was shitty and really wasn't in my favor were the game's load times. Not between scenes, mind you, while actually playing the game. There were actually times when I'd jump a chasm only to be stopped midair because the game hadn't loaded yet. It was as hilarious as it was infuriating. But the creme de la crap has to go to what happened to me at the peak of creation, the game's last stretch after defeating the final boss. During the final ascent, I legit got stuck inside the ground, and there was no escape. I tried using Levelum Dust to take me back to the last save point. I tried destroying my vessel in the options. I tried rebooting the game several times. Nothing. Restarting always put me back in the box of shame. After nearly 17 hours of grinding in Grime, I've been denied the ending I had so rightfully earned. F in the chats to pay respects. It's such a huge bummer, and would have seriously pissed me off had I not already beaten Grime on Steam. Still sucks I'm stuck and can't play New Game Plus though. Now for my final thoughts. Don't play Grime on the Switch, it sucks. But casting the abysmal Switch iteration aside, Grime is a great Metroidvania and an excellent Soulsvania. I found its combat to be simple yet engaging due in part to its parrying system and how parrying was integrated so well into many of the game's mechanics, such as healing and progression with the traits. And to see a Soulsvania so competently add good platforming into the mix is refreshing. The boss fights are phenomenal, with each encounter being challenging, fair, and fun, if not a little frustrating. But that's par for the course when it comes to Soulsvanias. Exploration's enthralling because there's so much to find and fight, and the intriguing world drives you to keep going just to see what's around that next corner. Couple this great exploration with its creepy atmosphere and well-told narrative, and you got yourself one hell of a great package. Again, please don't isolate that line. Could the last stretch of the game had been a little more buttoned up and less of a contrived set piece for the underutilized double jump? Sure. And could backtracking have been handled a lot better? Of course. And could Grime have at least tried to pretend it respected its players' time by minimizing lame Souls-like practices like boss runs and making the elevators go a little faster? Absolutely. It's clear Grime has some shortcomings, but these missteps do very little to detract from what's ultimately a stellar Soulsvania experience. And that's what's going to make or break Grime for some gamers. Do you really want to play a Souls-like? If you're an MV vet who doesn't mind Souls mechanics, you've probably already played Grime. But I'm going to recommend you play it again because it's so good, just not on the Switch. As for noobs and everyone else, if you don't like Souls-likes, Grime isn't going to bring you around. In fact, it'll only reinforce your hatred of the genre. So think really hard about whether or not you want to dip your toes into a Souls-like before playing Grime. And as you ponder that, I'll be here, waiting inside the box of shame for a patch that'll somehow release me from this prison so I can finally see what happens when I reach the peak of creation. Maybe I'll sing a song to pass the time. This is the song that doesn't end. Yes, it goes on and on, my friend.